Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod. Our decks are not optimal, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I am Andy.
I am Bruce!
And this is our final season of the... our final episode of the season.
I'm like, wait a minute, where were you cutting it? We're calling it a 10?
After 10 episodes, so the way we're going to do this is every 10 episodes, it's going to be a new season. We're going to do 10 episodes, and then a couple weeks off, and then come back, do 10 more episodes. We're going to feel it out and see what y'all like, see what we like doing. This episode, it's going to be a special episode. We're going to do a theme deck. Maybe we'll start doing that as our season finales.
You know what? I guarantee that out of all of the Temple of the False Pod podcasts that our audience has listened to so far, I guarantee this one makes the top 10. I guarantee it.
I don't know. I did do that little 2-minute intro episode, so
that's nice and all. But,
So today, let's set the rules. Last week, we came up with an idea for a theme of a deck. Since deciding that, we each made a deck based on that theme. We didn't share with each other what specific cards we were putting in. But I think we all know one card we both put in, which we'll get to.
We'll see.
When we go over that. So basically, this time around, we decided on Germs.
Yeah.
A Germ tribal deck. And we came up with two very different decks.
I got just one thing. Right off the bat, I don't think this is going to be too shocking. We both included all the living weapons. That was the idea. However, we both included all the living weapons we were allowed to include in our decks. So when you're looking for differences between the two decks, don't go scrolling through the artifact section on each deck. And yes, we'll make sure the links are in the show notes. Don't go scrolling through the artifacts expecting to discover that one of us did not put Mortar Pod into the deck. It kind of came with the deal. That was sort of how we set it up. So, however, from there, I think we went in dramatically different directions. So, Andy, you want to explain how you came to this point, to choosing the commander, to setting up the deck? How did you get to here?
Oh, sure. So, the commander I chose was Sharum the Hegemon. For those who don't know, is 3 white, blue, black for a 5/5 legendary artifact creature, Sphinx, flying. When Sharum the Hegemon enters the battlefield, you may return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield.
I'm sensing a possible working with the with say living weapons and the germs.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, looking at my architect list, I go to my section called My Germy Boys, and it's the 10 living weapons. Those were the first cards in. Those were cards 2 through 11. My first card was none other than Temple of the False Pod. Temple of the False God. What am I, vain? And so cards 2 through 11 were these 10, and I realized that they all make black germ tokens, and one of them actually has black in their color identity, and that is Lashrive. It has equip 2 Phyrexian black mana, so you can either pay a total of 4 life or 2 black mana, or any, 2 life and a black mana. Anyway, all said and done, it can only be in decks that have black in their commanders. So I wanted flicker decks, or I wanted to make a flicker deck that also had black in it. So I came to 3 colors, which was white, blue, and black. White and blue have a bunch of flicker effects. Who knew? And from there, I realized that my little Germy boys were a bunch of 0/0s. So if I ever wanted to move any of the living weapons, they would have to kill the germs. Unless I had a bad moon, which says all black creatures get +1/+1. And from there, I added a bunch of anthem effects, got a Spear of Heliod in there, got Deathbringer Liege, and that kind of idea of making my creatures bigger in general, which is great for attacking, but also great for 0/0s, honestly. From there, I added some just general graveyard recursion artifact stuff. I got a Junk Diver, Open the Vault, Trading Post, Mirror Retriever, some classic things. And then my two favorites, Ritual of Restoration, which is a single white sorcery, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, and Reconstruction, which is a single blue that does the exact same thing. So, kind of threw those in there to help if I couldn't get Shroom out or any of the flickers to flicker Shroom. I had ways to get my living weapons from the graveyard to my hand to replay them, or in the case of Open the Vaults, directly back on the battlefield. Also, some prohibitive things, especially with these living weapons, is that, well, with any equipment, you've got the cost to play it, and then you've got the cost to equip it. With the living weapons, one or both of those are a little high. So I made a group of cards that either allowed me to reduce the cost of the equipment, with regards to Brass Squire, allow me to just tap to equip, or something like Sigarda's Aid or Hammer of Nazan, where I could, as soon as it enters the battlefield, equip it to a creature.
Right.
Which, I mean, if they're a living weapon, they already come with their own creature, which is great. But it's just nice to have the flexibility if you want it on something else.
So one of the combos in the deck that I particularly like is the combo of, obviously you've got the Germs, but you also have Conspiracy.
Ah, yes.
So that will turn all of your creatures into Germs, I assume, right?
Yes, that was actually the point of it. Right. I was like, how do I make more Germs? Nothing other than living weapons make Germs. So I went through and I was like, oh, I've got Arcane Adaptation. I can do Conspiracy, Xenograft, so that I can make all of my creatures Germs.
Well, more importantly,
I really wanted to make this deck Germ heavy.
Right, and more importantly, it means that Divine Visitation now makes 4/4 flying Germs.
Yes.
That is delightful. Delightful.
Oh, also,
I love it.
Yeah. Also, I had Mirror Entity in there so that they're all Germ Angels.
Yes.
Bear, rats,
sounds like
cats.
a 50s song.
Yeah. There were a few cards in there, I'll admit, that I just added because I was like, oh, I've got black and white, that these are just good cards I wanted to add. So I've got All That Glitters, which I've got a number of artifacts and a number of enchantments. So I was like, yeah, All That Glitters, go right in. Trailblazer's Boots just helps when I've got weak Germs to just get in for some damage.
Are the boots there for Shroom, or are they just there for whoever happens to be swinging in?
Just whoever happens to be swinging in. It was mostly just to make anything that I wanted unblockable. It's great because they're Trailblazer's Boots, for those who don't know. Artifact equipment for 2. Equipped creature has non-basic land block. Equip 2. So, throwing them on a little tiny Germ to get through. I was like, this seems tasty. Whispersilk Cloak, kind of the same thing, unblockable. And then I've got Revel in Riches and Divine Visitation as some sweet enchantment sweets.
Looking through the cards, I noticed there's another one there that I particularly like. It's Hammer of Nazan, actually, and honestly, I think that's probably something I should have included in my deck. Just because, for those who are wondering, Hammer of Nazan is a legendary artifact equipment I'm not going to worry about the cost or the equip cost. It's not important. Really what I'm looking at is whenever Hammer of Nazan or another equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach that equipment to target creature you control. So, given that you're trying to flicker to get more germs out, but this means that it comes out, and then it says you can attach equipment to target creature you control. Well, the equip costs on the living weapons, a lot of them are not cheap. As soon as you're talking about Strandwalker or Skin Wing, so something that can deal with flyers, when you're talking about giving trample and some of the more effective abilities that these weapons give, the equip costs are high. So it to me, I like the idea of Hammer of Nazan being able to simply equip it onto another creature on the battlefield. Now, I get it. If you don't have a way to bonus your germ, that's kind of a problem, because then the germ just immediately dies. But
maybe you're willing to do that. I mean, honestly, like I was saying, like it's either the cost itself or the equip cost are prohibitive on a lot of these. For example, Skin Wing, 4 to play and then 6 to equip, which is like mind blowing for +2/+2 and flying.
Right. Like, well, here, Necropouncer. The key with Necropouncer, I mean, sure, it gives +3/+1, but most importantly, it gives haste. And you just paid to put a creature onto the battlefield. Now you're supposed to pay a 2 mana equip cost, which, in the greater scheme of things with living weapons, is fairly low. But it's still 2 more mana. It just would make so much more sense to be able to, especially when you're flickering it. So you're going to flicker it, have it come into play, and then you don't even have to pay the 2 equip cost to put it on something that just hit the battlefield, and now you can attack with it right away. Oh, and, it doesn't hurt, you're getting 3 extra power, but that's the sort of thing I was thinking about.
Yeah.
And
then from there, I kind of added in some general removal. Generous Gift, Blink of an Eye, Executioner's Capsule, Dispeller's Capsule. I liked the capsules because they allow for recursion, because I've got artifact recursion already built into this deck.
I was going to ask about that as well, because I noticed that, obviously there are better ways to do what those 2 enchantments do, but they are artifacts, so if you have ways to recur your artifacts, and I know you do, they just make sense.
And the cream of the crop in there is Pestilence for a little flavor, because Germs, they don't interact any better with Germs, but Pestilence, you get it. I don't... From there, I also had a bit of a suite of artifact spells cost less. So I've got Foundry Inspector, which just makes artifacts cost less, 1 less. Daneth the Capuchin makes equipment cost 1 less, which...
That's big.
It's the theme of the deck. Joyer's Familiar, historic spells cost 1 less. So not only do my artifacts cost 1 less, my commander costs 1 less. And then Nahiri, the Lithomancer from Commander 14. She has a -2 ability that says you may put an equipment card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield, which is big.
That is big, because for those of you at home who aren't actually looking at the list right now, Necropouncer is a living weapon. It costs 6. Scythe Claw costs 5. Strandwalker costs 5. And then a number of others cost 4. Batterskull, 5 mana. Getting these put into play for the cost of 2 loyalty counters off of Nahiri, that's huge.
Even if she were to die that round, you paid 5 to get possibly one of your biggest artifacts out of your graveyard and directly onto the battlefield. And it can't be countered that way. And then I had some extra slots that I thought I would make a little pillow fort for. I've got Ghostly Prison, Norn's Annex, Propaganda, and Windborne Muse, making it so that people have to pay to attack me. And that's the general gist of the deck. Oh, I guess I forgot. I've got a handful of cards that allow me to flicker things.
I was going to ask you about that as well.
They are mostly to flicker the commander once the commander's on, but looking through the list again and again, things, you'll always find certain things work out better than planned. But for my flickers, I've got Yorion, Sky Nomad, Brago, King Eternal, which will flicker on combat damage.
I wanted to ask a quick question. With Brago, are you likely to try and flicker the living weapons if they're already equipped to something? I'm just thinking about the equip cost, because obviously if you flicker them, they come back unequipped. You get a germ. So,
right.
So if you're swinging with a Leonin Shikari that's equipped with Strand Walker, if you want to flicker the Shikari, even if it's just to have it so that it ends the turn untapped. To do that, you end up flickering that. Well, if you don't flicker the Strand Walker, it just sits on the board. Or you can flicker them both, and then they both come back untapped. You get a germ, but to be able to put it back on the Shikari, your equip cost is 4 for something like that. I don't know if that equip cost make a difference, or...
I think the nice thing with Brago specifically is that you get to be very deliberate with what you're flickering. And in this case, I think it would depend. I think if it's late game and you just need blockers... Yeah, I might flicker both and then have a germ token and the Shikari as 2 blockers. But if you don't have like a lot of mana, it might not be worth it. If you still had a lot of mana up, yeah, maybe you flicker them both and then hold up some mana, because if it's the Shikari specifically, you can equip with Flash.
Right.
But the idea behind it was to flicker Shroom to get things back from the graveyard. Right. And I'm sure there are plenty of better ways to like flicker it on demand, but these are the first ones that I thought.
How often do you expect to be using Shroom to get living weapons back? Because part of what I was looking at when I built my deck was that it just didn't seem like there was going to be, like, I kept trying to picture situations where that artifact was going to die. And so much, most of the time I'm picturing combat situations where the germ dies in combat because it's just not big enough. But the weapon sits there, and now I'm either looking to bounce it just from the battlefield or using one of your other abilities. I mean, you've got ways to equip at instant speed. You can reduce equip costs. You've got all of that. So I mean, that's not really an issue. I was just wondering if you were looking at ways to sack artifacts to get a benefit.
I didn't even think of sacking artifacts as a thing. Like that is a great idea for this deck. Something that I think future
because I mean, you've got Ashnod's Altar, which makes perfect sense for the deck. Because I mean, of course you get rid of the germ. Why would you flicker a living weapon if it's already equipped with a germ? Better to flicker the living weapon. Leave the germ, especially if you have a way so that the germ survives. Right. And you just flicker it, it comes back, bam, you've got another germ. And then, or you can just use the germs to, ramp up the altar, and then you're flickering all the weapons to get, new germs back.
And I think that was the thing, is that through the creation process of this deck, I realized that Shroom was more of a backup. Right. Like, she was there to give me color identity, and in case for whatever reason my artifacts are going to the graveyard. Right. I think it's a lot less likely, but it's there if I need it.
And I would have said to you many years ago, I would have said, you should not use Shroom, because Shroom just simply draws hate. That's just not the case anymore. I mean, Shroom is still really good, and you can still build combo around Shroom. I wouldn't let it sit too long on any battlefield, but there are so many new legends out there that are just so good that Shroom just isn't going to draw the same kind of hate that it used to. So I think you can run a deck that features germs using a card like Shroom.
And on top of that, I mean, I've got 6 cards that already bring artifacts back from the graveyard. 6 other cards, and then I've got Academy Ruins. Trading Post is great for just like getting things back to my hand. So like, even with Shroom out of the picture, if cost becomes prohibitive, she's a 6 cost creature, so play her twice and she's gone. Like, I can get things back from the graveyard still.
Right.
As
far as I can see, the only card that I think absolutely should be in the deck that isn't listed here is Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. And the only reason it should be there is for Lashwraith, because Lashwraith looks at the number of swamps.
Look at that. I only have 7 swamps in this deck.
Right. So you just throw Urborg in there, and boom, your number goes through the roof. And I guess, if you're extra concerned about it, you can look at a variety of dual lands, that have the basic types. So swamp, whatever, and go from there. Those are pretty minor cosmetic changes, though. I like this deck. I think it looks like a lot of fun. I like having some recursion in the deck, and I think that this deck makes you jump through enough hoops so that you just don't get this feeling like it's completely broken. So
yeah,
that's just something I love. I love to see that. So
yeah, I'm excited to try it out. And Bruce, before we get to your deck, let's throw it over to our sponsor for a little sponsor break.
Sounds good.
Be right back. This episode and season of Temple of the False Pod is brought to you by Pestilence. While we're all stuck at home, unable to play Magic in person, so many ways to gather without gathering have really made their name known. We've got the classics of Magic Online and Arena, but also some love playing on Tabletop Simulator or Spell Table. Whatever way you choose to play Magic, please keep safety in mind. I'd love to make more of a joke here, but it is all to be taken quite seriously. So please, when in public, wear a mask, physically distance, and wash your hands well, and regularly. As we bring our season to a close, we're excited to bring you Season 2. Season 2 also was recorded deep in a quarantine. Bruce and I haven't had the chance to play together in person since way before the first episode of this season, and, well, we'll continue to bring you quality podcast throughout. Stick in there, play some Magic Online, whether it's Magic Online or otherwise, and stay safe. Back to you guys. Welcome back.
Hey.
That was a fun one.
You never know what you're going to get for a sponsor.
Speaking of germs, I hear you have a germ-based deck.
What?
I would love to hear about.
Sure. All right, so before I even tell you who the commander is, I'm going to tell you how I got there, because I think that's kind of, it sort of leads up to how the deck got built in the first place. So the idea was, I started with the germs, and I'm like, okay, so how do I make this work? I've got 0/0 creatures, so either I got to pump them up, or I want to find ways to do something with these germs. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can double them. Maybe I can cause, so that way when a living weapon hits the table, maybe I've got doubling season. Then I get 2 of them, which is great, but only one of them is going to be equipped, and then the other one just dies. Okay, so now what I want, doubling season, and then I also need a way to pump up the tokens. So that can't be that hard. There's tons of cards out there that all of your creatures get something. So like, okay, great. Well, I'm in green, so find another card that gives them +1/+1. No problem. But the trick is that they're black, and a lot of the cards specify what color creature gets the benefit. And I'm like, well, okay, that's not a big deal, because I'm running green, and I'm going to run black, because the living weapons are black, so I'm going to run green and black. So, like, great. And then I immediately thought, ooh, I could run Gliss of the Traitor, which kind of sucks, because I have a Gliss of the Traitor deck, but you know what? For this, we'll do Gliss of the Traitor and see how that goes. And then I started doing everything else that goes along with it, and realizing the deck relies on that moment when I drop a germ. So, okay, so we're going to play for this moment when I spend mana to play an artifact so that I can get 2 germ tokens. This was so underwhelming for me. It was unbelievable. So I'm like, okay, well, then if we're playing Glissa, how about I think about ways to put these artifacts in the graveyard? Okay. It's harder than it sounds. There are ways to sack your permanents, ways to sack artifacts, but everything involving this just started to feel like, oh my God, it's just like there's too many steps. And, look, I love a Rube Goldberg machine as much as anybody, but at some point you have to stop and say, okay, so for this deck to work, I need 5 different pieces of the deck to be out there. And this is all to get some kind of benefit out of a 0/0 germ. And it was just like, this just isn't working the way I want it to. So I kept scrapping it and scrapping it and scrapping it. And then I finally started thinking about, okay, well, maybe I just want to replay them. I'll sack the germ token, because it's a 0/0, to get something. And then, just bounce the equipment to get another germ token. So like, okay. So let's take a look at that. So I started searching around to find legendary creatures that would help that along. Whether, maybe they bounce, maybe a legendary creature that bounces the artifact, maybe something that gives a benefit when you sack the creature, something for whatever. So I looked at a bunch and then came on one that I thought was sort of near and dear to my heart. And I settled for Jalira, Master Polymorphist. So Jalira is a 4-mana legendary creature. It's a human wizard. It's 3 and 1 blue mana. Jalira is a 2/2 creature, which, trust me, is irrelevant, other than, how strong is it to hang in there. But most importantly, for 2 and a blue, you tap Jalira and sacrifice another creature. Hopefully a germ token. Then you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. In other words, this is polymorph for the old school players out there who remember polymorph. For the newer players out there, think of mass polymorph, but it only does it for one creature at a time. So instead of having your whole army gone and you're flipping over tons of cards trying to build this new army, you're getting to pick and choose just the one creature. And I thought, this is great, because I'm going to have a germ token. I can sack the germ token for 3 mana, and then flip cards until I go in. And the next best part is that in the deck, these are artifacts. They're not creatures. So it lets me have a whole heap of little tiny creatures that can be used to find much, much, much bigger creatures, bigger and better creatures.
Heck yeah.
The downside for polymorph, and everybody who's ever run this kind of deck, is you have a whole host of creatures in your deck. Generally, to polymorph, you have to have smaller creatures. So the downside for polymorph decks has always been, you got 20 creatures, half of them are small, half of them are big. Well, when you start doing polymorph, you end up flipping into another small creature. That sucks. So you want ways around that so that you can fill your deck with just big creatures. So that way, every time you activate this, something big is coming down the pipe. And that's what you want. And as somebody who plays a polymorph deck in a 60-card casual deck, in that deck I use just token creatures as my small creatures.
Yeah.
It's a different way to get around it. But this at least gave me a start. And I'm like, okay. So I've got all my living weapons, and I've got Jalira Master Polymorphist. Obviously, Lashwraith can't be there. It's black. So Lashwraith is out. Not a big deal. I also included a card called Birthing Bows. It's a 3-mana artifact, and for 4 mana you can tap it to create a 2/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. More importantly, you're creating a 2/2 germ.
It's a pretty big germ, Bruce.
It is a pretty big germ, and I'm not 100% sure that this card would stay in the deck as you play it out, because essentially you're spending a whole lot of mana to sack this thing to go and find something else. So it may not stick around, but I like the idea of having as many possible germs as I could have. There's a few changelings in the deck. There's Shapesharer, which is a changeling, and it has the you spend 3 mana, and target shapeshifter becomes a copy of target creature until your next turn. So you can copy any other creature on the board with it. And because it's a changeling, it's every creature type, so it's also a germ.
Nice.
All of this is there because that's how it started. The problem is there's no real benefit in this deck to being a germ. That's just the way the deck...
I don't think there's any benefit to ever being a germ.
I don't have any cards in there that say, all cards of this creature type get a bonus. Right. So while you've got Bad Moon that gives all black creatures something, while you can, name a creature type, it gets a bonus. This deck has none of that. These germs are, if they're going to get bigger, it's going to be by accident. The expectation is you're going to play the living weapon, you're going to sacrifice the germ, you're going to get a huge creature onto the battlefield, and then you're going to then find a way to return that artifact, to either bounce it or flicker it or put it back in your hand so you can cast it again and get another germ token.
You say that for Birthing Bows, 4 mana is a lot for a token. But Necropouncer, 6 mana is a lot for a token.
Well, this is true. However, like you said, it does have haste, so you can at least swing in. This is the benefit: is Jalira doesn't have a timing limitation on it. So you play Necropouncer, you swing in with it, you see how they decide to block, and if their block is going to kill it, no problem. You sack it before damage is dealt. Sure, you don't kill their creature, but you get a much bigger and better creature. And oh, by the way, you have Necropouncer sitting on the battlefield waiting to equip it. The other benefit is you can also do this ability at the end of an opponent's turn. So you can have surprise blockers when you need them. You can also play these creatures at the end of an opponent's turn, right before the start of your turn. So the big creature that comes out is essentially has pseudo haste because they came out just before your turn started. Mm-hmm. That's sort of where this is going. I've also included Polymorph and Mass Polymorph in the deck. I've also included Proteus Staff. These are basically all ways to polymorph. The difference is that Proteus Staff lets you polymorph an opponent's creatures. So if they've got something out that's particularly good, you can polymorph it away in an effort to try and get them to find something that's less good.
Yeah.
So it's quasi removal if you need it that way. But I thought that at some point, if Jalira becomes too expensive to use, you're still going to want to at least have some ways to keep this deck churning. And that was sort of where I went with it.
From the looks of it, it seems like all your creatures... I mean, you've got a handful of exceptions to this, but all of your creatures generally are over 4 mana cost, which is great. The least you're going to spend is 1 mana for an equipment, and then sack the token with Jalira for 3. I mean, I guess you've got Training Grounds, which makes those types of activated abilities cheaper, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I mean, Training Grounds is specifically in there for Jalira, just because I don't really want to be spending 3 and losing a creature and losing a germ just to get, a more expensive blue creature. Ideally, I'd much prefer to just spend blue. However, Training Grounds is also in there for where was it here? Like Fairy Formation. Mm-hmm. It's one of the creatures that I want to go find, and it has an activated ability that's 3 and a blue to create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying, and you draw a card. So if I can reduce that cost by 2, I can spend 2 mana, get a flying creature, and draw a card. So if, for whatever reason, if I'm having issues with getting the germs out, well, there's some fairy tokens that could also be sacked, and that can reduce that cost down.
Does that also, I would assume it does, reduce equip cost if you need it?
No, because it's activated abilities of creatures you control. So
never mind.
Unfortunately,
those aren't creatures.
Yeah, they're not creatures. I initially when I grabbed Training Grounds, when I was thinking of Training Grounds, I was thinking this is really going to work well with this, and then realized that it doesn't work quite as well. However, when your commander is doing the key thing,
right,
it just makes sense.
Yeah, you're not focusing on the equipping; you're focusing on the tokens.
Right. I mean, I've also got Sphinx of Magosi in there.
Nice.
And that's 2 and a blue, draw a card, and then put a +1/+1 counter on the Sphinx. So if I can reduce it to blue, make your creature bigger, and draw a card. I mean, this is not, it's not rocket science. I mean, once I knew that Trading Grounds was in there, I was started to do that. I've also included Illusionist Bracers as a way to sort of double up on the Jalira, and 1,000-Year Elixir. You may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. So Jalira hits the battlefield, you don't have to wait a turn to tap it. You can just do it right away. And more importantly, spend 1 and tap the elixir to untap target creature. So then Jalira can then untap and you can do it again. Because one of the things that I thought would likely be happening with this deck is that it just wasn't going to get enough power out as fast as you wanted it to. So having the elixir be able to activate it twice just seemed like a good idea to me.
Yeah. So I've got a card that I've seen you use plenty of times.
Yes.
And I'm sure it might be just a cost thing in terms of mana. But Hearthstone does a very similar thing to Training Grounds for more and does less. But it's not nothing. Especially in such a hard artifact heavy deck.
I did think about Hearthstone, and it's likely something that would get added to the deck. The problem right now is that I haven't played the deck enough.
Yeah.
I'm confident that Hearthstone should probably go in. I just don't know what I take out. Right now, I think I've got a pile of ways to recast the artifacts because I know that I want to keep churning more germs out. I want to be able to recast these artifacts. I want to have that option in my hand almost all the time. So at any point in time, I want to be able to do that. And I tried to choose a lot of ways that were, a lot of them that were repeatable, because part of the reason I'm not a big fan of sorceries and instants is because they tend to be one-time shots and then they go away and I just never seem to get them back. And it's just like, do I want to burn an entire card to put a living weapon back in my hand so I can pay another 6 mana to put it back out on the battlefield? And that gets to be tough. It's a lot easier to do when you start thinking to yourself, you know what? Master Transmuter works so great. Spend a blue, tap it, return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. So return the living weapon to your hand.
And that's the pay cost. Like, that's the cost.
Exactly. And then the result is you may put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield. In other words, you can put it right back out.
Yeah.
So if someone's about to destroy it, you can spend a blue and put it in your hand. And because it's the cost, it happens before they're killed.
It goes on to the stack. Yeah.
Right. So there. And now you can put it back out. It's a different thing. So it's not targeted anymore, even though technically it's not the same thing. Practically it is. But for Magic, it means that their spell fizzles because the target's not there anymore. But it also means that, the 6 mana cost cards are essentially down to 1 blue. The problem is that Master Transmuter is 1 card, not many cards. So you have to find other stuff. So I started looking at things like Tidespout Tyrant. Whenever you cast a spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand. So it means that you're getting a bonus on top of any other spell you're running. I put Isochron Scepter in here, so it can find the instants that cost 1 or 2 mana that bounce an artifact back. So that way I can just, spend 2 mana and get to do it again and again and again. And then I can use my bounce spells to focus on my opponent's stuff and use it more as removal. So that's essentially where that that package goes, but I just don't know how big it needs to be. And until I'm confident that I can safely reduce that pile, I'm not going to throw Hearthstone into the mix.
That's fair.
And on top of that, the downside with Hearthstone, and it's less of a downside as long as we're all continuing to play remotely, Hearthstone works for everybody.
Oh my god, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So when you play it...
You've played it so often and I didn't know that.
Right. And that happens mostly because we're all playing online. You don't... You read the card, you see how the card interacts with their deck, and then it's gone. But Hearthstone is one of these older cards that interacts with everything that has that activated, the cost. So while I play it in my Grenzo deck, and it's great with Grenzo, because, it just reducing the cost to 1 instead of 2 is, well, it's twice as good. And it would do even more for Jalira. It's just, I don't feel like I have enough other creatures that take advantage of it. And to be honest, Hearthstone is a very good card for a lot of other people. There are tons of activated abilities that opponents use that can really pile up. But so I also looked up, I did look on EDH Rec to see, obviously I knew where I was going. So I knew that a lot of the cards on EDH Rec just simply weren't going to apply in this deck because of where I was focusing the flicker. Because they were going to give you a bunch of cards that give you token creatures, and I really wasn't looking at that so much. So, and then what I decided was, what I wanted to do was the creatures that I'm going to go search for with Jalira, the bigger creatures that are really the focus of why we're killing these germs. And I don't like to think of it as killing the germs so much as transforming the germs into bigger, better strains of germ. I decided to look at obviously just blue and colorless creatures. I focused on mana costs of at least 5, and I also only looked at the cards that I own. I'm not trying to build the best Jalira deck out there, obviously. I've included 10 living weapons who, to be blunt, these are not going in the premier decks. But I thought, you know what, if I'm going to go down this route, then let's personalize it and make it mine. And so all of the creatures that I'm using in the deck are creatures that I own. So off the top of my head, of course, I cannot think of any one creature that was sitting on EDH Rec that I chose not to use because I don't own it. But I went through basically my cards and said, these are the ones that I thought would work best in the deck. And of these cards, I can go through each of them and you sort of get a sense of why they're there and how they fit the theme. Like Arbiter of the Ideal, whenever it becomes untapped, I can look at the top card, and if it's an artifact, a creature, or a land card, you can put it onto the battlefield. Well, that's 75% of the deck. So there's a very good chance that almost every time Arbiter of the Ideal untaps, you're getting something. So I love that idea. I thought that was something that was going to be fun, and it was going to give me a lot more cards. Djinn of Infinite Deceits. The whole idea of exchanging control of 2 target non-legendary creatures. Initially, when I saw this, I thought, ooh, I can trade a germ for anything my opponent has. They'll get a 0/0 creature that dies instantly, and I'll get their thing. However, for the most part, I think with this one, I'm much more likely to exchange control of 2 target non-legendary creatures and make them both not mine. So mess with my opponents and give them each other's creatures, and see how that sort of pans out. A lot of people are running decks where that creature works really well in their deck, but only in their deck. Well, great. I don't want it. I'll just let the 2 of you have it, and then you can each have cards that are essentially useless to each other. So I like that idea. Part of the reason I liked it is because I always like my commander decks to play different all the time. And when you start messing with the creatures that your opponents have, your deck is going to play different every time because you're playing against different opponents every time. Or different decks that your opponents are going through. we already talked about fairy formation. I mean, hey, little creatures that you can sack to Jalira. It draws cards. Hymar Rhymewind Master. It's return target permanent to its owner's hand. So in other words, a living weapon. I can only play the ability if I control 4 or more snow permanents. Well, all of my islands are snow-covered islands. There are 31 of them in this deck. So I expect that I will get to 4 pretty quickly. Or at least soon enough so that Rymar actually gets to do his thing. The Perplexing Chimera, that really ties in along with that whole Djinn of Infinite Deceits. The idea of swapping your creature for something else. In this case, you're swapping the Chimera for anything else. A spell, an artifact, whatever. I think this might be one of the first cuts. Just because I've played with the Chimera, and it is difficult to use. You really do have to have a deck that's a little more built around it than this. As I say, in a lot of decks, it's just underwhelming. If you're playing your Teysa deck, unless I can catch you casting Teysa and swap it, you know, what am I going to swap it for? You know,
and I would see that coming.
Well, that's just it. When Perplexing Chimera is sitting out there, you see it. But if you continue to play, you know, small creatures where you gain a life and everybody loses a life, is it likely that somebody's going to swap the Chimera for that? Probably not. So I'm thinking the Chimera might be one of the first ones to go, but you know, forever hopeful, and I always like to see it. Scourge of Fleets was something that was on EDH Rec, and I love the idea that it also gives me some sort of like a quasi mass removal.
Oh yeah.
As I said, 31 islands in this deck, so there's a good chance that I'll be able to wipe the board pretty good.
Yeah.
Personally, I like Shimmer Dragon as one of the options. A 5/6 flying dragon, and I will almost always control 4 or more artifacts. Beyond the living weapons, almost my entire ramp package is artifacts. And then there's a handful of other artifacts as well. So,
and the great thing with that too is that equipments don't tap when you attack with the creature.
Yeah. That's right.
So you can just draw so many cards.
So you can tap your equipment and still swing with the creature. It really doesn't matter.
We're not playing by old rules anymore.
Right. So hey, tap two pieces of equipment, draw a card. This is just it's all plus side there. Sphinx of Magosi I already went through. Stormtide Leviathan. I mean, I think that's pretty evident with all lands or islands in addition to their other types. So it helps beef up some of the other cards I'm playing. And honestly, of the bunch, I think this is probably the most boring one because everybody knows this one.
Yeah. And I mean, if you turn a Germ into a Stormtide Leviathan, you're going to have a lot of people looking your way.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see how that one rolls. And Vesuvian Shapeshifter, I like that idea as well.
Yeah.
I mean, if it comes out of your hand, it's certainly coming out of nowhere. It's even better than flipping it over as a morph creature because, I mean, you didn't even see it. Yeah, so the only land that I was at all interested in, you've already mentioned this one, is Minamo, School at Water's Edge. Untapped target legendary permanent. The only permanent I care about for this one is Jalira. I mean, it it just gives me a second activation. It does mean that I'm going to have a fair bit of mana out there because if I don't have any other ways to reduce the cost, I'm spending 3 tapping Jalira, and then I'm going to spend a blue, plus I'm tapping Minamo, which would be another blue, to untap Jalira, so then I can spend three more. So I need essentially 8 lands to make this loop work. But it's there. We'll see how it goes. I mean, in theory, I guess it could also untap Hydar. I'm running Extraplanar Lens. My ramp package is horrid. I think it's terrible. I think I could do much better if I just spent another couple hours trying to find things that would just work better with the deck. Obviously, I chose Extraplanar Lens, and that's part of the reason why all the islands are snow covered, because then I'm the only one who gets that benefit. The Search for Azcanta I kind of liked. Sky Diamond, again, this is another card that I think is it's weak. It's not that great. Just because it costs 2 and taps for a blue, well, if it enters the battlefield tapped, then realistically it kind of costs 3 because you're not getting it until the next turn anyway.
Yeah.
So, you have to keep that in mind. I'm generally okay with it, but...
I think it's a great, budget choice.
Right. It was interesting because a lot of the ramp that I looked at were small creatures, like the mirror that taps for a blue mana. And there's another card called Apprentice Wizard. And the wizard is you tap it and a blue mana to get 3 generic. I love this card. It's an old card. Not many people use it.
Great art. Ooh.
Exactly. It's just really cool. But I didn't want to clutter the deck with a lot of tiny creatures.
Yeah, that's fair.
As it stands, I've already got Shapesharer in there, and I may be tempted to pull that out just because I don't want to cloud the pool of the big guys. The other part with the bigger creatures, I intentionally did not put Eldrazi in. Eldrazi is old and boring, especially the Eldrazi that have Annihilator. I think Annihilator makes the game so much harder for everybody because now all of your opponents have to attack you. Once you declare who you're attacking, the Annihilator trigger is already there. They can't wait and see who's he going to attack and then I'll get rid of the creature because the Annihilator is already hitting. And when and when I'm flipping a Germ over to bring out Kozilek with his, I think it's Annihilator 4 or one of the other massive Eldrazi, that's just that's too much. It's too much.
Yeah. And it's so done is the thing.
Well, that's just it. I mean, yes, you can absolutely do that. And all the power to you. And honestly, once you've done it once, I don't know that you're going to be that excited about the next time you get to do it. So I've got these 10 different creatures listed here. If I play the deck 4 times or whatever and decide, this one doesn't work real well. Well, I'll pull it out and put something else in. Or I might even decide, I'm just bored of this. That's the joy of the polymorph deck, is essentially those creatures. You're not worried about the mana cost. You're not worried about how they fit in the curve. Those are just 10 creatures. Yeah. They're practically a sideboard. You can pull them out and put in different ones as much as you want. You can do it every game so that you're always getting a different experience, so that if you play with the same play group, you can flip them out over and over again. My old polymorph deck only had 3 creatures in it. And for a long time it was Progenitus, it was one of the Eldrazi, and Akroma were the 3 creatures. And then after a while I just got bored of that. I'm like, okay, this is silly. So I tried something else. Throw in some different stuff just to see what's going to come up. And it's fun because then it turns out your opponents, you've told them at the start, hey, we got some new creatures in this one. So, they know that it's going to be another miserable, tough creature to deal with, but they don't know which one it is. So there's at least that level of, ooh, something different and exciting. And you start to pick creatures where it's like, all right, here's the creature. It's big, huge, and nasty, but it has an Achilles heel, as opposed to, something perfect that's virtually impossible to get rid of. That's something that I hope to do with this deck as well.
And I love that, given the restraints of Germs, you and I both went in very different ways. I mean, there was a lot of recursion of the artifacts, but my deck was a lot of, I need to make everything Germs, and I need to make more if they die. That was like the big thesis when making that deck. And generally, yours came down to, let's turn these Germs into bigger things. And it's fascinating because I think, given a similar philosophy in the EDH world, I think you and I can build similar decks a lot of the time, but it always has our own flair to it. And I think if anything, you and I have learned over the past, and hopefully you listeners out there have learned from the past 10 episodes, is that it's not about doing the optimal thing. It's not about doing, making this as honed as possible. It's about having fun, having the story. For me, building this deck reminded me a lot of building like my Teysa deck. And granted, I ended up putting Teysa in this deck because I wanted this deck to be mine. I love my tokens, and Teysa makes the tokens better. There was something else I was going to say to wrap it up, but if you have anything else you want to shoot out before we kind of bring this to a close, I invite you.
I very much wanted to see how each of us came about with the deck that we would choose. Now, I've seen this done plenty of times when two people are given the same legendary creature. And you can almost predict how it's going to work out by the legendary creature, because some of them are very narrow and, demand that you run along a certain path. So you can see that, both people did very similar things, maybe chose slightly different cards, but it goes that way. Or you give two people a commander that is very wide open, and then you see the options go out in different directions. I was really interested to see how a theme like this would work. I mean, we're not talking about one card. We based it around 10 cards. This was a hard theme because you're expected to use these 10 cards. I mean, neither one of us wanted to create a deck that was going to simply have these 10 cards and be like, okay, there's the 10 cards. I'll live with them being in the deck, but here's my deck. This is what the deck does. And these cards are just sort of there because they're there. But we took them and made it into the deck. And I was very curious because there was a big part of me that looked at what the living weapons offered and really felt like we're going to see very similar decks, because when you've got that many cards in both decks, the decks should probably be leaning in the same direction, but apparently not. So this is just one of the joys of deck building for Commander. I mean, you get pointed in a direction and then everybody just sort of scatters from that direction and you just make it work.
One of my favorite points of building this deck was finishing the first draft of the deck and then immediately going to EDH Rec to see what other cards were in Germ tribal decks and finding out there's no Germ tribal deck in EDH Rec.
No, because people have more sense than we do.
Yeah, well, you know what? We did a podcast. We made 10 episodes so far, and we plan on doing more coming up. We're gonna take a 2-week break, come back on the 3rd week. As always, I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
We're Temple of the False Pod. Our decks are surely not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Thank you so much for listening these past couple weeks. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more episodes. We're so excited to bring you this next season. More fun, but not more a fun. That's a different card entirely. Sorry, bad jokes. Have a great night. See you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Andy here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Temple of the False Pod. Just a few housekeeping things here at the end of the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe and give us a review. It really helps out the show. And it'll show us what you like about our podcast. Also, we've got a Twitter and an Instagram. Our handle is FalsePodMTG, all one word. So be sure to follow us. Feel free to reach out to us there or drop us an email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com and tell us your favorite Magic-related story. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to you and to Bruce. He's Mana Burned on Twitter, and I'm Andy Weekend on Twitter and Twitch. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Have a great night, and may your 5th land be the Temple.